Hi Jessica, welcome again to PyCon Colombia 2019.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun to be here.
We are a few hours away from your keynote. How are you feeling?
I feel great. I mean, honestly, I do a lot of public speaking, so I don't really get nervous about that anymore. But also, the organizers have been so on top of things, and it made us feel so welcome. And just the attendees are so friendly and gregarious, and I've had a chance to talk to so many people. I think it's going to feel like talking to family at this point, so I feel great about it.
Excellent. That is a good thing to hear. Thank you.
Absolutely.
As a starting point, could you please share with us some of your career path in the software industry?
Sure, yeah. Well, man, it feels like I've been doing this for a while at this point, but I'm not one of those folks who was programming since birth. My first degree is actually in chemistry. Oh. So I have a not that I've used it very much since then, but my first degree is in chemistry, and then I picked up a computer science degree, and then a computer science master's degree while I was at MIT. And since then, I've really mostly been in startups. So today I'm a founder and the CTO of a company called Pilot. Pilot does bookkeeping, but in a highly automated fashion. And one of the fun things is that I've had the great honor and pleasure working with the same founding team since school. Oh. So we've been together. We met at MIT. We've been together ever since. This is our third company together.
Oh, really?
So our first company came out of the master's thesis of Jeff, one of my co-founders, when we built a company called Ksplice that it was a service built around a technology for rebootless kernel updates on Linux. So I'm like a systems engineer by training and by heart. So it was really fun, sort of deep technical expertise for that startup. That company was acquired by Oracle. But a lot of C and a lot of assembly, but actually a bunch of our infrastructure was still in Python. So Python is like the primary language I've used since the beginning in all of my jobs. So Ksplice was acquired by Oracle.
Okay.
Hung out at Oracle for a little while, left. Same group got back together in one of our apartments, thought about what startup number 2 is going to be, started this company called Zulip, which is sort of like Slack before Slack existed. Slack is then great at executing on that, but learned a lot building that company. That company was acquired by, also again in primarily Python. It was like sort of a Django app with Tornado glommed onto the side. It's sort of complicated piece of infrastructure, and all of our backend systems were in Python. Okay. That company was acquired by Dropbox, where I did a pretty solid stint. I was there for 3 years. I was the director of engineering. For part of my time there, I was sort of like the group lead for the set of teams that were responsible for all of the platform software at Dropbox. So the desktop client, which is in Python, is probably one of the biggest Python distributions ever, just given how many Dropbox installations there are. So responsible for the desktop client, the mobile apps, a web as a platform, and then the internal and external APIs. That was all part of my that was my neighborhood. And then the same team eventually left Dropbox to start Pilot, which, as I said, does sort of highly automated bookkeeping in Python. Actually, quite a very sort of sophisticated, very modern Python 3 installation. We push a lot of changes upstream too. We use MyPy, and it's like a very it's a pretty stacked team. Actually, a lot of folks who some people might know from the Python industry. Glyph, the creator of Twisted, works at Pilot. Allison, who is a phenomenal engineer, does a lot of public speaking as well, is at Pilot. A lot of Python DNA, which allows us to get a little bit fancy with our code base as necessary, but a really delightful code base to work in. And now I'm here.
That is a long trip.
Yeah.
So I see you started as a software engineer, and then manager, and then director.
Yeah.
What were the main challenges of the transition?
That transition, yeah. Well, in some ways, I'm fortunate that it's been a very natural progression. So I started as an individual contributor at Ksplice, moved into a tech lead role over time. When the company was acquired by Oracle, moved into a people management role for a single team. when we left and started Zulip, I was a founder in the VP of engineering. So sort of still had a little bit of time for IC work, but was mostly focused on running engineering as an organization. When we got to Dropbox, that became many teams, a couple of teams, and then many teams, and then really having a lot of sort of really being responsible in conjunction with the VP of engineering for making sure that the full organization of many hundreds of people was well stewarded, not just from a technical perspective, but from sort of the organizational and the process perspective as well. And then, it gets small again when you go back down to pilot. You start out with nothing. You start with zero, and you have to build the team from nothing. But it's been the progress has felt very natural, and I think I really benefit from having to operate. I think I really benefit from switching between operating at a bunch of these altitudes and getting comfortable doing that. Okay. So being really hands-on with a small team, operating in a larger, in a several thousand person organization, being responsible for an 800 person group within that organization. I think those experiences keep me on my toes about whatever it is that I need to be doing to have the most impact, regardless of the stage of the company. So I feel very grateful that I've had that diversity of experiences, and I think they contribute to why I think I'm an effective founder these days.
Let's say a software engineer is planning to becoming a manager,
sure,
or a director. What would be your advice based on such experience?
Yeah, I'd say do it because you actually enjoy the people management parts of management. A thing that I hear somewhat frequently is, I want to become a manager because then I get to make more decisions. Like, I'm more in control of more decisions. And that's actually, if that's true, if senior ICs have less visibility and less agency over technical decisions than managers, that's actually a dysfunction of the organization that should be addressed. It shouldn't be that way if it is that way. So I hear people wanting to move into management because they think it'll give them more power. And that's not a good reason to move into management. You should do it because you like that type of problem solving, you enjoy the people dimensions and the organizational and the process dimensions. It's really just what altitude and what type of problem solving you want to do right now, or that you feel you'll learn from or you'll have the most impact with. So if you're an individual contributor, you're solving problems in code, and like that, there's a lot of power and satisfaction in doing that. If you're a people manager or a director within a larger organization, it's more about the strategy, the organizational strategy, right? And the process strategy. They're both problem solving. They're both really important. They're just at different altitudes.
When you were at Dropbox,
yes,
it was the big company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then with your team, you say, okay, we are going to quit Dropbox and start Pilot.
Yes.
What were the main challenges of that?
Of the transition from Dropbox back to Pilot? Well, truthfully, because we've done this a couple of times, it gets easier every time. So having done the startup thing and just knowing some of the mechanics of starting a company from scratch, hiring from scratch, it gets much easier after you've done it, twice before. But it's also, you're back to having none of the infrastructure that exists at larger companies to help you do the work. There's no HR department, there's no recruiting team, there's no office team. So, the founders are, as necessary, out recruiting, cleaning the toilets, making sure that payroll is run on time, making sure our internet connectivity is, you are the backstop for everything. There's not necessarily somebody else you can rely on, as sometimes you can in a large organization, to make sure all of the different pieces of running a company are being taken care of well. So you have to transition your mindset back into doing that, which I enjoy doing. I think it's part of why I love being a founder, and I love the work of building from scratch. A lot of it isn't engineering, right? A lot of it is this organizational stuff and just like the infrastructure of running a company. And so it's similar to your question about managers. I engage with a lot of people who it's like, I think I want to start a company. The question is why? Well, if your answer is because I want to be the boss, that might not be a good answer, because being the boss means cleaning toilets, right? It means you have to make sure everything is working and all the unglamorous stuff falls to you so that your team can be laser focused on what they're great at. So for people who like that type of responsibility, being a founder is an incredible experience, and I really like it. But it's not necessarily for everybody.
Yeah, and a lot of people are starting companies right now. What do you think would be the biggest advice that you would share with them?
For first-time founders,
Yeah.
do it only if you're excited to clean the toilets too, honestly. And then the other thing I'd say, one other maybe more serious piece of advice, I think there's a lot of, what's the word? I mean, there's a lot of like mystique around founders. Like we celebrate. It's like when people think about founders, they think about like Mark Zuckerberg, or these like they're these sort of caricatures, I think, of real life. It can be, and I think, or Steve Jobs, and it's like, can you only start a company if you have a vision for the future that only you can see in your head that you can bring to the world? And so the other thing I would say is, I think there are at least two types of founders. There are like ideas people. I'm not an ideas person. There are ideas people who can see the future and they can see what they want to bring into the world. And then there are operators, people who are really good at executing. That's what I am. And there's like room in the world for both, and for like people from both camps to get together and be really successful together. So I would hate for anybody to feel like they can't be really successful in building a company because they're an operator and not a visionary, or because they're a visionary and not an operator. It's like both styles are valid. It's a question of getting the right team together behind an idea where there actually is a market for it. You can actually validate that there's a market for it.
And on Pilot, who is the idea person?
Well, I think that my co-founders Jeff and Wasim would, if they were here, they'd probably agree with this. I think none of us are visionaries.
Oh.
And I'm not embarrassed to say. So I think we're really, really good operators. Like, so the way that we backed into the idea for Pilot, so automated bookkeeping, is we did a bunch of research. I mean, we did the books for our previous companies, so we had a little bit of hands-on experience with that. We knew how much work it was for us, and we suspected that this would be this is a pain point for other startup founders and other business owners. But we validated that by interviewing lots of people at lots of different companies. So we didn't wake up one day, sort of as I imagine Steve Jobs did, and it's like, oh, this is the thing that needs to come into the world. It's like we did our homework basically. So we're an example of the operator style of startup founder.
Okay. I've heard about, before this interview started, we talked a little bit about the last mile.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And Pilot. Could you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, so for some context on this, I spend a lot of time at work, and when I'm not at work, I mostly am in prison. So I do a lot of, I'm very engaged, especially in the state of California in the United States, with a variety of sort of prison reform initiatives, direct volunteering inside of prisons, and then working on the infrastructure to support re-entry for folks who are getting out of prison, especially folks who have an interest in technology. And so some of the ways I've been able to leverage my background as a technologist include working with this nonprofit called The Last Mile, which is, it's really, it's a first of its kind. It's really on the forefront of how we think about job training and re-entry. So The Last Mile, it's a couple of years old at this point, but it's a nonprofit that teaches programming and entrepreneurship to people who are currently incarcerated, mostly in prisons in California today, but also some other states in the United States. So I'm inside San Quentin State Prison in California every Tuesday, actually teaching a Python class. And the goal is, well, the goals are all of the good things that you and I have gotten from learning how to program. It's like the debugging skills and like just the satisfaction of the craft. But the other goal is that it's job training, so that upon leaving prison, programming and software engineering are like really on the table as potential employment opportunities. And so I've been honored to be able to volunteer with the Last Mile, and then Pilot is really sort of on the vanguard as well of helping to build the infrastructure for and demonstrate that it's possible to hire people who learned how to program in prison and to support them and have them be really successful and really effective once they get out. So Pilot has successfully hired folks who are formerly incarcerated, and just I was telling you next week I'm very excited we're interviewing someone for a full software engineering role who learned how to program in prison. He then went through like a 6-month boot camp, like software boot camp afterwards. He just graduated, and I've been doing some practice with him because he's never had the opportunity to interview for a software job before. But he'll go through our full standard evaluation process because he has all the tools and all the skills that he needs to do this successfully. So I'm excited for him, and I'm excited that in addition to Pilot being an incredible company from a business perspective and from a technical perspective, that we're really able to leverage this platform as an employer to set an example that hopefully other companies might be inspired to follow.
What is your main motivator on starting working with Last Mile?
It's about justice and equity in the world. This is a longer conversation we probably have time for, but the criminal justice system in the United States is flawed in many ways. There's a lot of bias, there's a lot of racial bias, there are lots of other kinds of bias, and there are a bunch of ways to work on making that system more just and more equitable, and one of the ways that we can engage as technologists is by supporting the job training and reentry component of that system. So I came into it, I think, from that perspective. How can technologists engage with this system in an effective way? And this is not the only way, but it's been a really interesting journey.
So based on our previous conversation, we were talking about that Pilot is working on this project, and hopefully in a few months or a couple of years, you will have a solid structure to do this, and hopefully companies would join. What advice or what would you say to the companies that might be interested in doing this?
I think it goes back to some of what I was just saying, which is, in many ways, tech companies are so privileged. We get to work with such good people. The jobs are so high paying for software engineers. It's an industry that has a lot of weight. And I would encourage companies to really think of themselves as more than just businesses and more than just sort of implementers or users of technology. It's like the platform that is available, I think, for tech companies to fight for more justice and equity in the world is outsized, and so we should capitalize on that.
In regards to the soft skills that we also talk about before, what has been your experience or your point of view on the soft skills from the people that finished that program in Last Mile?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, as we were talking earlier, one of the things that's been really awesome about spending a lot of time engaging with folks who are currently or formerly incarcerated is that by virtue of their circumstances, so folks who sort of need to prove to the state that they are no longer a threat to society and should be released, they do a lot of work. They do a lot of rehabilitative programming. They take a bunch of classes that give them a lot of tools and language and practice with, explaining yourself well and having a lot of empathy for other people and conflict resolution and like really root cause analyzing one's emotions and the emotions in other people and figuring out how to get to a productive place with counterproductive feelings. And so when I'm working with folks inside and formerly incarcerated, I find that they often have a much better toolkit than I do, or even a lot of the other people that I work with for resolving conflict and for supporting people because they've practiced with a lot more intention than I think a lot of people who haven't been in their circumstances have. Which has been really fascinating. I've learned a lot from those experiences, like as a person and as a manager and as a leader.
It's a really fascinating process what you are doing in pilot and last mile. I think that is something that few people must be doing.
It's very early. It's early days, so it's. I don't even want it to be the cutting edge. Like, I'm excited for it to not even be a new thing anymore. But it's been very. I'm very grateful that I can participate in it.
There are also other communities that are raising awareness about the gaps. For example, the gender gap.
Mm-hmm.
And you are a public figure. What would you recommend to women that are joining the technology communities or are starting a technology career?
Definitely.
What would be your advice for them?
Yeah. Well, fun fact, Pilot's engineering team is over 50% women. not an accident. The main thing I would say is technology and software engineering and programming are great disciplines. These are jobs that pay well. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of agency and autonomy. Like, this is a great industry to be in. There are some things about it that are imperfect. There are some things about it that we need to hold ourselves to higher standards on, and we need to keep working on together. And not just for gender diversity, for a bunch of other things. But, I'm thinking about was there any other industry that I'd want to be tackling those problems in, right? Because and I think that the tech industry and open source communities and software communities are actually, they're like more willing to be reflective about these things than a lot of other industries. So I think the capacity for growth and the trajectory for improvement, like sort of holding ourselves to higher standards as companies about how to build a great diverse team, and in open source communities, how to build a great diverse community. I think there's just like a lot of capacity for good there. And even when I think about, it's like when Carol and I were doing this 10 years ago, we've already seen so much change. Like the conversations about this are so different now than 10 years ago. And so to me, that's really emblematic of this being an incredibly powerful industry with a lot of capacity for sort of continue. We believe in continuous improvement. It's like as a discipline, we believe in root cause analyzing things and blameless postmortems and continuous integration, right? Like I think we have all of the right tools to continue making this an even better industry to be in. And so I feel my feedback or my advice to young women maybe thinking about studying computer science or thinking about moving into technology or software engineering as a discipline, you should definitely do it. It's a great place to be. We have some things that we're still working on, but there's nowhere else I'd rather be doing it.
Well, I hope many people and many women hear your advice and definitely join this industry and reach help from the many communities that are being created to help them and to reduce the gender gap. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Thank you so much.